City cheats into chat. Don't do that. Don't give away the cheats. All right, let me do the formal YouTube intro, and then we'll get this get it going. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you are doing well. It is time for an exclusive conversation and interview with the one and only Chaz Bear, a.k.a. Toro Y Moi. New album, Mahal, is out now. It's on all streaming platforms. Listen to it. We're going to be talking about that LP and more. Anything else that comes up in the conversation? First off, thank you for coming through, and how are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing good, man. Just like you said, I'm at my childhood home, and it's our day off in between tour dates. And it just happens to be we played Columbia, South Carolina last night. So
nice.
Feels good.
So, the new record is out. You've been working on it a while. How, in your opinion, has the reception been so far? Because, your discography has so many interesting aesthetic and stylistic changes across it. So I imagine each album release, including this one, has to be like a bit of a surprise for you, like in terms of like how is the audience going to take this direction? Yeah,
it's definitely been it's like a learning process a little bit, but it's also kind of just like I feel like it's some of it's muscle memory, just being like, okay. I think the big thing for this rollout is just that there is a rollout. I've always been so kind of like anti-rollout and like anti-long rollout. So for a lot of people, they don't know that I turned this record in like a long time ago. Like I turned it in June 2020. So like I just was like being patient, trying to really just get the creative stuff figured out. And like I've never really done a concept rollout like this. So I think for me that a big thing was just like maturing and just sort of like learning how to just do those kinds of moves or whatever just to grow the band. So yeah.
Considering that you had, a more conceptual rollout, that's something that you didn't really kind of engage into deeply before. What about this time around, kind of going deeper into that maturity that you're talking about, kind of drew you in that direction?
I think, like a lot of artists, the pandemic and lockdown gave a lot of people time to sort of recalibrate and think about their approach. So that's sort of where I was too. It's just like, but for me with Mahal, like I didn't make this record during the lockdown. It was more like, this was like a good time to just wrap this project up. So like I wasn't able to book the sessions with, whoever or go places. So it was just like, well, I think this is done. Like, I feel good about it. It's been 5 years or so. Let's wrap it up.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about this time for other artists kind of being a moment to recalibrate just because of kind of extraneous circumstances. But for you personally, considering your trajectory up until this point, and this album kind of being your first record of this decade, did that also become a cause for recalibration as well? Did putting out this record and, thinking of the time past cause you to think about this album in context with everything else that you've done up until this point for the past 10 years?
Essentially, yeah. So like, I think that's when I hit that 10-year mark during 2020, during the quarantine, I for sure was like, oh, wow, I never thought that like the things that come to mind, like when you're 10 years into the music career or whatever, like I felt like, like an example, like I never gave attention to my back catalog.
Right.
So like that's something I wanted to have fun with, do anniversary releases, like cassette tape, instrumental releases and stuff like that. So like, I just felt like, oh, that's a whole nother part of the entity that I never really even thought about. I was always just thinking about what's next. So there's that. And then also just like, 10 years in as an artist, like you start thinking like, what am I trying to say or prove? Like, what else is there to say or prove? And like, who are you trying to please? What else is there that you haven't done yet? So all of these things are coming into play. And I just sort of try to just enhance what Toro is like.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the fact that you did those instrumental re-releases of like Underneath and Causers, like going back over those projects and stripping the vocals out and kind of listening to them again with that gap of time, did that kind of cause you to see those records in a different light, or hear something or feel something out of them that maybe you didn't when you were kind of in the process of making them?
Somewhat. It's funny, like Underneath the Pine was heavily influenced by like soundtrack music from the 60s and 70s, and that stuff, for the most part was instrumental. And then same for Causers. Causers started off with like being influenced by like Dilla beats and stuff like that. So like I think just as a producer and a fan of music, I just wanted to put those out there for other producers and people to sample or whatever they just might be influenced to make stuff. So yeah.
And I guess like did it cause you to think of those records in terms of like how they fit into your overall discography, or sort of how you've kind of progressed artistically, or maybe certain things that you used to do or employ back then that you just don't anymore, or things that you moved on from?
Not too much. It's more just like showing appreciation for them. Like I know that I'm most likely not going to make another record like Causers that's that heavily sample heavy and vocals, like maybe there'll be something similar, but I just wanted to show like my appreciation to the fans, just literally just give them instrumentals to like enjoy or mess with. But yeah, I wasn't going that deep on it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, considering that you say that, like, would you say almost like the eclectic variety that your discography has built up to so far, like, is that just kind of a natural occurrence, or is that informed at all by like, okay, I did this and I can't do it again. I need to actively avoid doing that and just kind of do something else entirely?
Not exactly, because like that's where I was kind of torn making another rock album, being that fans have heard What For, which is another rock album before.
Yeah, you
like,
kind of went in a psych direction on that one too.
Yeah, so I just wanted to like show awareness that yes, this is another guitar Toro record, but it's not. What For wasn't a phase, and like neither is Mahal, but I do want them to sort of be connected somehow and sort of just coincide the Toro story line.
Okay. No, that's interesting, because I mean, again, I did kind of notice that stylistic and somewhat aesthetic similarity, but I would still say like they still sound like vastly different records to me, but in a way you still do kind of see them as connected in some way. Do you, what maybe kind of digging below the surface, do you think maybe makes them, maybe not sister, maybe cousin albums or something?
Exactly. I mean, I think these guitar records that I do, like that's my only chance to really jump into the band. I can wear my band hat, or like my band leader hat, because like the electronic records I'm making pretty much by myself, but these instrument records, I feel like that's when I bring in drummers and bassists and guitarists and really get to have fun and play, Phil Spector. So I can sort of there is an enjoyment there, but at the same time, I don't want to introduce something too far off that's going to catch people off guard or unfamiliar. But yeah, I'm like, how do I, like, what do I even say with this record? Because like they've heard a rock Toro before, but like, how do I make it not the same? So that's where for me, it just came down to the vocal delivery and the lyrical content.
Again, something I was going to ask you about. I love the way that this conversation is moving. One of the things that struck me about this record in comparison with your past ones is just like the really intimate setting in which you present some of the vocals, like on tracks like Deja Vu. Not to say that the vocals on your previous records, that there's no clarity to them, but there's like a serious, like almost ASMR style closeness, to some of the singing on this new one. And was that a barrier for you? Was that sort of something that you needed to get used to or approach in a certain way to kind of make those performances happen?
Totally. I think a big thing, again, I don't know if I think I mentioned maturity and stuff. Like I literally, like my body, like my voice is a little deeper, like just I'm aging. It's like, so I'm just trying to find the right cadence and not sound like I'm singing outside of my range. So like, yeah, the delivery on some of these songs, it's more of a calmer cadence. I'm not really straining my vocals too much. And I'm just sort of honestly, I'm just reflecting the times. I'm like, well, kind of just like, I'm still recovering from whatever 2020 was. So like, I'm just trying to like capture that and find my humor within that too.
Mm-hmm. Well, kind of digging into that, like in what ways do you feel like, are you saying on that particular track or like on the record in general, kind of like a more humorous?
In general. Yeah, in general, like trying to find an adult sense of humor as opposed to like a childish. Yeah.
Is that where something like the intro to the Postman comes together? You know, where you're doing that little skit like, oh, do you have mail for me today? You know, there was something very like like I don't know, like it seemed like almost something like a sad skit you'd hear on like a Mr. Rogers episode or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Totally, dude. Yeah. I wanted it to just blatant humor. That's all. It's just like, okay, this is a skit or something. So with Toro, like I really didn't get a chance to show much sense of humor until like maybe Outer Peace. Like that's where I really started having fun with sounds, especially, and not trying to like stick to conventional or traditional sort of expectations. Even like honestly, like a good thing that I always tell people, like a good thing I always do is I'll like show my wife or my partner like some sounds or lyrics, and if she laughs where she's supposed to laugh, where I'm like, please laugh at the sound and not just think I'm crazy, that's a good sign. So like I don't know, like something from like for Freelance, for example, like when I was like she like laughed and I was like, okay, you're supposed to be laughing there, that's good. Okay. So just like channeling more of that sort of research or something.
You know, before we move on to this other thing, just to kind of dig into that for a second, is your partner often your sounding board? Like when you're going through any kind of like creative process, is she one of your first go-to?
Kind of, yeah. Sometimes no, but if I'm really unsure about if this is crazy sounding, or I'll like show her first, and I'm like, is this just stupid, or am I acting crazy here, or is this awesome? So.
And are there times where she's like, nah, move
on? Yeah. She's like, you said that phrase wrong. It's actually like you're not supposed to add whatever stem. But yeah, she'll like.
What if you're like pulling on an idiom or something?
Yeah,
that's funny. Like, so you're getting like spell checked. On your work. You were talking earlier about with this record having something to prove. You mentioned the almost like the vocal delivery in that context. Are there other ways on this LP that you felt like you had either, I don't know, bridges you had to cross or things you needed to accomplish that maybe you hadn't before?
Yeah, I think the hard balance for me with these like guitar focused records is just getting the musicianship to the right level. Because I've always wanted my music to resonate with like musicians, producers, and also just listeners and fans and people that just enjoy like pop music. So finding that right balance of like a technical guitar solo or a drum fill, like that was really necessary, because a lot of these songs are simple and like they don't go into like crazy like third bridges and stuff like that, but they're pretty straightforward songs. So I needed the experimentation to be as concise as possible.
Is that part of something I wanted to ask here? Is this part of kind of a natural process of kind of changing sounds and directions with each LP? I sort of imagine in a sense, like when you're going from a record like, Boo Boo and then Outer Peace and then this new one, like, does that cause you to have to kind of redo your whole studio, the instruments you surround yourself with, your process, and kind of like just break it down to the bottom and kind of build it back up from scratch in order to get to where you want to be sonically?
Right. Sometimes, I mean, each process, the recording process for each record is different, no matter how much I try or don't try. Like it's, for example, for this record, just like the act of getting other musicians involved for each song, as opposed to like what for was like the same core people for the whole record. Like, that in itself was hard. Just like being patient and trying to find the space and time to do all that stuff. That was a challenge. I didn't really go anywhere else, but I did move my studio, down the street, and that was a change of pace. I think it was big to get, I don't know if you're familiar, but I have this like art studio that's kind of like a warehouse space and has like paint studios. So during quarantine, I don't know, most likely other artists can relate to this, but like I just, there weren't as many people coming into the space, and it was just me and my keyboard player, Anthony. We were just renting that space, and during quarantine, we just decided to I decided to move out, and then we doled out more of the space to other artists just to give it more of like a communal vibe. Because when it was just the two of us and no tours, it was just like kind of a sad, quiet place. And that was a great jump. It was cool to have like that thing going at that warehouse space. And so that gave me a chance to move my music stuff and studio to a secluded, like dedicated space just for music. And that put me in a different mind state, if anything. Like it definitely, like getting my own personal dedicated music space was like a professional step I never really took. Like before, it was just the DIY space with like a painting setup, video setup, like a Warhol type space. So yeah, I approached this record, I guess what I'm saying is like over time I've just become a little bit more professional and tried to just like approach things in a pro sense, like the way you have your live stream studio. Like I don't even have a live stream studio, like I just now bought a ring light and stuff like that. So like there are things like I'm like learning how to like just approach this digital age in a more professional way, approach music in a little bit more of a professional sense.
Yeah. If after this, at some point you ever want to talk cameras or lighting or, just let me know, we could talk shop about, go on. What were you going to say?
I said I got that A10 mini all set up. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, if you ever want to talk any streaming, anything, I guess just let me know. You mentioned something about the record process earlier about almost reaching a conclusion like, oh, I guess this is like done, and there is a quality to the album that is it in an interesting way kind of sprawling, mm-hmm. Like over the course of it, like, dig into that a little bit more. Like, when did you know you were finished, or when did the album start to feel kind of complete? Was it a sense of like finality, and were you, I guess, like kind of internally harmonious with that, or did you feel almost like kind of forced into having it be done?
A little bit of both. I think it was more the latter, though. I do feel like it was just feeling like I've got a good amount of songs, a good set of songs. So my general process, no matter what genre or themes the record is going for, like I'm constantly making all sorts of music at all times, and if I end up with 10 guitar songs, great. So like once I got that group of songs, that's when I'm like, okay, I can start jumping into lyrics, just because I used to write lyrics at the same time. I don't know what happened, but it's just like I'm not there currently, and I have written songs. They just end up sounding like different genres. They just, I think this is how this type of music is made. I think it's all woven together. So, but yeah, I think I had all the instrumentals done by like 2019. And then, 2020 hit, and I was like, oh, okay, time to wrap it up for sure. That's when I hit up Alan and Salami Rose, like all of the guests were during 2020, and I was like, okay, well, we can't squeeze in any more in-person sessions. Like this is our last chance to sort of try to do something. So yeah, it was just that. So yeah, I've been sitting there for a second. And it wasn't until I finished the record around June 2020. That's when I actually showed it secretly, and they're like, yeah, we're down. So
okay, cool. Let me ask you about what you saw, or what ended up being. Maybe you didn't understand it until it was done, because you do talk about the record in the context of what for, in a way, but simultaneously, like, there are psych tracks on there, especially the intro, but there are other tracks that are a little more tongue-in-cheek and funk oriented and that sort of thing. But that's not to take away from the LP. I think it still comes together into a pretty cohesive piece. Like, what would you say personally, either over the course of making it or after the fact, ended up being like the rubric for this record? You know, over the process of making it, like what told you this is a song for this record, but this other thing, this other idea that I may have in my head is not?
I think the big thing for this record is, I don't know if you can tell, but maybe some people could, but I started most of these songs on bass. Bass and drums.
Nice.
Yeah, started with the rhythm section. It was something fresh for me. I've never really done that. It started back when, again, started during, I made some of these songs during the What For time, but a lot of the songs of What For were written on piano or guitar first. You can totally hear those songs living without the rhythm section. But for Mahal, a lot of these songs are like bass and drums heavy, like Deja Vu, for example. That's probably one of the most obvious bass heavy tracks. Like if you take the bass guitar out of that track, there's no chords. Like the guitar really is just playing a single note. So a lot of that thinking, and that just came from me wanting to just start these jams out on bass. That's something I never really got a chance to do, is just like let my inner McCartney out and just really try to just like get these Hofner bass lines out of my system.
Okay. No,
bassist, right?
Yes. So I totally sympathize with that. And, you know, again, like, and I also think of like Postman, for example, as far as like standout grooves and bass lines and everything on the record. So no, I totally hear that. I do hear, you know, kind of the connections to What For, but simultaneously it is a lot groovier. And I think that is kind of, you know, one of the many dividing lines there.
Yeah, it's that's the bigger thing. I mean, again, this record isn't meant to be like too much of an experimentation, but I wanted them to be accessible. So the only place I could experiment was, jamming on the bass for this project, at least. Yeah.
But with this one as well, you also do have like those tiny little jazz detours and excursions on like Last Year as well. You know, it's like, what kind of was driving that?
Yeah, during in between Toro records, I think it was in between Boo Boo and now, you know, I did that Matson 2 record, Star Stuff.
Yeah.
And that really got my feet wet in that whole world of trying to just be a little bit more jazzier, like not being too worried about if you're doing it right or wrong, or if whatever world it ends up in genre wise, like but the jazz elements have always been in Toro's music, in the Toro music. It's just, it never was that obvious, like time signatures and scales. So like it was always more in the chords, less in the solos. Yeah.
And also, you know, go into what you were kind of referencing earlier in terms of like maybe some of the lyrical boundaries that you're talking about here, because also, you know, on that track, if I remember correctly, you also make that allusion to like learning to love yourself in the last year or so, you know, and it does kind of seem like, while the album doesn't read like a diary, it does seem like you're very consciously throwing these lines out there where you are kind of talking about like some personal mental kind of growth that you're going through.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that song specifically, there's like two scenarios in my head. Sure, there's that introspective self-love aspect. There's also the more broader sense of just leaving your comfort zone. To be completely honest, like that song was inspired by me living in Portland and learning to accept the rain and learning to accept being wet for 6 months in a row. And like, you kind of just learn to love the rain and walk your dog in the rain, everything. So like, for me, the year I lived in Portland, that was a very awesome time for just growth and learning. Like that's when I made Boo Boo and really got into the more like spiritual, almost woo-woo side of music. By the way, woo-woo is what sparked Boo Boo. Like for me, Boo Boo was like where I really got into tapping into like, you know, my Solange type cosmic references and whatnot. So let
me in on, because I haven't, you know, sort of dove deeply enough into this outside of like the features. You were talking earlier about all the people you had involved on the record. Like, you know, are there some other, you know, inclusions that you'd like to kind of go into that don't, you know, obviously like hit you from just kind of looking at the track list on the album that kind of made the whole thing possible?
I think a big factor to this record, honestly, was my old guitarist, Dylan Lee, who played with Washed Out for the past 10 years. He was in my first band, or one of my first bands, called the Heist and the Accomplice, with my current bassist, Patrick Jeffords. And actually, the drummer from Washed Out was also in that band. So it was the four of us. We split up into Toro and Washed Out. And Dylan, I mean, like, he's just an amazing guitarist. He played on Deja Vu and Days in Love. And he's sort of like, he's the one that's adding all of that Southern twang, which I really wanted to capture in this record. Because I just felt like it's time to just like represent my Southern like heritage, my upbringing, like, and like do it in a prideful way without it being too like cringy or whatever. Like, South Carolina is an interesting place to grow up, and I love it. And there's like a lot of ties to roots music, blues, and everything like that. So this record had a lot of blues undertones, and I felt like it was just fitting to have his bendy guitar solos on there and stuff like that.
Is this maybe like, you know, kind of nodding toward a possibility in the future, the Toro country record, the Toro folk record?
All I gotta say is, Darius, hit me up, bro.
Darius Rucker?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Darius?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, I just think it's funny the amount of parallels that Hootie and the Blowfish and the Heist and the Accomplice have.
Go into that. Don't just leave that there, please, because I'm a bit of a like early Hootie fan. So
yeah, I mean, I do think Darius is definitely the archetype for a lot of you know, like token black guys or black guys in white bands, whatever. Like, he's definitely like held it down, made it, normalized it, and I think like, yeah, that's a similar trajectory for me. So I just feel honored that they're from South Carolina too. I'm like, oh shit. But yeah, I grew up with Hootie, and I don't know if that subconsciously like affected. It had to have, if I think about it, really. But yeah, yeah, I just like really, again, going back to just the Southern representation on this record, I feel like it was due. It's overdue, and like it needed to happen like sooner than later. And given the state of the world and social, just the state of the world, like I think, yeah, a little positive representation for the South wouldn't hurt.
Got it. This guy in chat says that my friend's dad was the original drummer for Hootie, so that's quite a connection. And cool. And you know, someone in chat also reminds me of you know, some other recent stuff going on in country that's been interesting me as of late, like you know, Orville Peck, for example. You know, is it a genre? Is it a genre that you usually find yourself paying attention to? I mean, you know, as you're kind of saying, you may not incorporate it super often in your music all the time, but you know, given your background, given your roots, obviously given the Hootie fandom, is it a style and a sound that you often see yourself kind of listening to casually?
I think it's safe to say I was like raised on blues and country. I just never showed it. Like it's kind of everywhere in South Carolina. It's like, right, you can't, course. I'm sure most of like rural America is like this too, but like it's kind of just ingrained. But taste wise, yeah, I don't know. Like there's tons of different types of country, and there's but luckily my dad like raised me on like Hank Williams and the classics, Line and stuff. So like that's where my taste lies, is more in like the classical stuff. Even in the contemporary country though, that's where I go off. I'm down with, you know, the Diplo Morgan Wallen collabs. Like I'm thinking like even like Kid G and stuff like that. They're tapping into some interesting like cultural blending of like rap country, bro country. I think it's pretty cool. I'm not going to make bro country, but sure is entertaining.
Yeah. No, a lot of people talk about those snap beats and just sort of that they do that sort of incorporate like elements of trap and R&B. It's sort of a weird hip hop, R&B, country fusion that I don't know if any of us saw that coming.
It's a genre that I never knew I needed.
You know, it's just sort of funny and ironic to just kind of like go into a cultural detour here, because like I feel like the hardest rush of that stuff came almost immediately after the whole Lil Nas X thing, you know, when he had his breakout single, and there was that controversy over like, well, you can't count it as a country song. And then, you know, and then you had the Billy Ray Cyrus crossover and so on and so forth. And then after that whole thing where it was like, well, what's country? What's hip hop? What can be one? What can be the other? How do you cross over? Then all of a sudden it's like all these beats and all these, you know, productions are kind of coming out where it's like, yeah, this is just literally a hip hop song, but somebody's just like on top of it.
I mean, it's country, right? If you're singing in a Southern accent.
Right, exactly.
And you hit off all your points. You got beer, Daisy Dukes and trucks, whatever.
Beer girls.
Yeah, you got to hit the trifecta.
Right, exactly. So, yeah. Okay, so we'll Toro Country album TBD. You know, TBD. It'll just be a question mark. It'll be a question mark. Possibility. You know, to kind of dig back a little bit retrospectively. Again, I wanted to ask you, like, you know, over the course of your discography so far, are there any records that you've done that you feel like, I don't know, like, you know, complete albums that you feel like maybe didn't get their just due, or like you were kind of didn't quite get the reception from either fans or critics that you were hoping for at the time, or is it just kind of all water under the bridge at this point?
Oh, no, I can't complain. I've been pretty satisfied with the reception, and I think a lot of my fans understand too. Like, there's some fans that are coming from maybe not, or just outside the indie world, that don't understand, like, some of these records, or most of these records, were designed for the indie sphere. Like, they weren't made to break into the mainstream necessarily, but if some of them did, that's great. But like, I think I talk about this all the time with friends, is like, yeah, what is this, you know, underground mainstream line these days? Like,
right.
I feel like ever since the indie genre was coined, it's been trying to break down that barrier ever since. I mean, punk was on top at once, you know, with the Ramones and Sex Pistols. Like, that was the wave, and new wave. And I think indie is just punk. It's just sometimes it's folky or electronic now. But like, it's, to me, indie is like, yeah, sort of, it's also just a mindset, philosophy on like how we sort of approach the way we consume. If anything, it's just conscious consuming. So like, I try to just pay attention to that, even though that that idea is constantly shifting itself. Like what we're doing now, talking together online or in Zoom, as opposed to some major publication, I think is like it says a lot for itself too. So like, there is something bubbling. I don't know if it's the mainstream yet, but something's happening. And I think it's cool to just keep fighting the indie fight.
How do you feel personally about having successfully, I don't know, like navigated all that or stayed afloat during all of it? Because I mean, you know, I vividly, having blogged pretty aggressively at the time, remember like you when you originally blew up and what the music landscape looked like at that time. And many of those indie bands who kind of defined that indie sound of that era, you know, I remember like articles such as like, you know, for example, Jay-Z reacting to Grizzly Bear for the first time. Oh man, it reminds me of like when hip hop was underground and blah, 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 blah. But I mean, obviously like, you know, Grizzly Bear and all the bands that sounded like them are like completely washed out and everything. But you know, again, you've like completely, in on your own wave and in your own way, even though you sort of rode in on this whole chill wave thing, obviously you were not in control of that, but like that was one of the fastest things to kind of disappear. But like, you know, you sort of have outlasted all of it, and you still kind of have this mindset where you're like, well, I want to make records, but I'm not necessarily desperate for them to be mainstream, you know? So I mean, I guess like considering all of that, like what advice and perspective do you have in terms of like, being able to continue doing what you do and do what you love as a career and as a passion without it, you know, essentially like putting you in the poorhouse or, you know.
Totally. Did you see that Aziz Ansari special, the latest one?
No, I didn't. But if it relates to what you're about to say, I mean, go ahead and explain it.
Yeah, it does. Well, Aziz, he was talking about how he ran into Frank Ocean at a party, and he's like asking Frank about like, how do you do all these things or whatever, and whatever. And then Frank's I can't remember what he said, but Frank's response was like, you just have to be comfortable making less money. And then Aziz goes on to his bit. But like, I totally believe that, yeah, it's like, you just have to have fun with it. It can't be driven by money, and you just kind of have to, yeah, especially as an indie artist, you kind of have to, you have to know what game you're playing in a sense. Like, you're not going to be a millionaire like every year or whatever. Like, you're not going to make like, it's not going to be all music. You have to essentially diversify, if you allow me to get nerdy for a sec. Yeah. But so, yeah, you got to do that. You got to just like figure out what lane you're actually in. And I think it helps to be aware of like your audience and what their habits and preferences are. So like, I guess that's sort of what I've been relying on these days, and for the past like 10 years too. It's just like trying to understand this alternative audience. And I always grew up on like alternative music, like even Nirvana and stuff like that. It just became mainstream. So like, I'm totally like down for it to go mainstream, and I think it will. But or it has. But it's just kind of being patient, waiting for it to pass or come back and stuff like that. Did I answer the question? I feel like I got off track.
You know, it's a very tough question to answer, honestly. You know, it also makes me just kind of wonder, like, if personally, you know, have you sort of seen your own approach in terms of like how you handle what you do in terms of a career change vastly as, you know, the name of the game in terms of building a career for yourself has kind of switched from selling records to getting streams, you know, because I mean, when it was back in the 2010s or the very late 2000s when you were getting started, like, it was a totally different paradigm.
It is. Unfortunately, I guess I'm kind of proud to say I don't have Spotify. I do have Apple Music, but doesn't Spotify show the plays and stuff and how many people listen?
It can, yeah, I think so.
I'm not too familiar with the interface, but yeah, I'm glad I don't have it for that reason. Like my bandmates have it and stuff. They're like, "Oh, it's got 1 million plays." I'm like, "Don't tell me that." Like,
so it's like, yeah, I mean, it is the one platform that it does strike me as odd, even as just like a music fan, that when I go on there, and I have Apple Music as well, when I go on there, the first thing that you get hit with is like, what are their monthly listeners? And it's like, I don't know if that information is healthy to have, because then it just kind of like turns the whole thing into like a competition of like, you know, like a clout chasing kind of competition. If it makes it feel like Twitter, because when you go on someone's Twitter account, it's like, how many followers do they have? And da 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 da. It just kind of feels like that. It seems like it wants to quantify taste, which cannot be quantified, because like, that's why we have cringe culture, and that's why we have, boring things. But I don't know. These numbers attached to these stats and stuff, I don't know if it needs to be accessible, but it's good to know, I guess. I do appreciate playlist culture and playlisting. I think that's an interesting thing, but that sort of took over blogs and in that sense of like taste making. So I'm still unfamiliar. I barely follow like playlists even on like Apple Music. I just occasionally I'll like download like all of like the hard dance tracks or something and see what's going on in hard dance or something, or like country. But it's super weird. I don't know the best way to find music these days other than just like friends. Honestly, that's continued to be the best way for me personally, although it's now I just sort of consider the people who watch me and are kind of harassing me every moment of the day on social media to be my friends as well. They're just like, hey, you gotta hear this. You gotta hear this thing. But yeah, I mean, that's actually kind of what inspired me to start doing what I started doing in the first place, because, you know, some of my most vivid memories of getting into anything was just kind of hanging out at the college radio station that I used to work at and just kind of get into certain things when somebody had an indie show or a hip hop show or a metal show, and just hear what they were playing and what they were listening to in their giant metal playlist, and just kind of getting turned on to artists through that.
I don't know if it's like this for you, but was your station, I went like, all of my bandmates were DJs at the college station, and I just hung out and kind of just crashed their shows. But was it like this for you at the station, where it's like no top 40?
You know, at the time we had we were a part of like a CMJ, you know, so which would incentivize, you know, PR people to send us CDs and stuff. And, you know, we had to like have some sort of like rotation in terms of like incorporating some of those CDs and some of those artists. And I imagine some of those, you know, records probably were top 40, but we didn't have any sort of like major enforcement of like, you have to play a top 40 or you don't have to play a top 40. You know, it was pretty like outside of maybe a couple songs per set. It was pretty open to whatever people wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
WUSC was pretty strict about no top 40. And I think, I don't know who the director was at that time, but it was such a smart move in the sense of like, just like subconsciously catering or curating the taste off the bat. The station, I think that was a big influence, because like that's even how Public Enemy got started. It was just through the college radio station. So it's like, definitely for any music fan or kid out there that's interested, I think the college station's like that's your tribe for sure. Like I don't know what college music or college radio stations are like now, because the line has become so blurred between.
You know, from what I've seen, and I do speaking gigs at some colleges, and when I do, I'm often invited by the radio station. Usually it's the radio station inviting me. It's usually that's the club. And because they're still getting the financial support they always have as an institution, they haven't really changed. You know, so it's like, there may be less people overall interested, but like they're still there, and the people who I see consistently ending up there are usually music nerd types. And you know, so I mean, it's cool that that's still around. It's cool that that's still like a function of society in a way. But simultaneously, you know, while we have sort of like lost the blogosphere, as it were, you know, I go on Twitter or I go on Reddit and I see people kind of just huddling together into indie themed subreddits or hip hop themed ones. And when I go on there, like, I see a pretty eclectic mix of like different artists that are being suggested or celebrated or excited about. And, you know, even if like a lot of these people are young and may not like know the Velvet Underground or the Prince discography, but like the back of their hands, like they're still sharing in and they're still excited about some pretty eclectic stuff. Like, of course, they're all excited about like, when's the Kendrick record going to drop? When's the Tyler record going to drop? But simultaneously, like, hey, I just found this dude on SoundCloud. He's really cool. Let's be excited about this. So, you know, that energy and that passion is like still there. It's just happening in different pockets of the internet now.
Totally. Yeah. I'm always telling friends, just put your music out. Like, who knows who's going to catch it? Some blogger, creative director, you never know. It doesn't hurt to just release your music.
Yeah. There's so much saturation out there, but simultaneously so many opportunities for people to stumble across what you do for whatever random reason.
Yeah. People are hungry for new music. It surprises me. It's the one thing that honestly, like, kind of like can stunt me sometimes. I'm just like, I feel like even 10 years into my career, I do feel like, how do I do this again? How do I stay relevant or on trend, or like just not repeat myself? Like, how do you do it? But then I comfort myself by looking at, you know, the greats. Look at the Beatles. Look at Tame Impala. Look at Kendrick. Look at like
Hootie and the Blowfish.
Hootie and the Blowfish, no joke, for real, facts. Like, look at Darius. Like, they're really like navigating this music world, and everyone's navigating it in their own unique way, and it's successful, and there's so many ways to make it work. So there's no right or wrong way. I have to remind myself, even though I like to freak myself out.
You know, one of the last things I wanted to ask you with this in your mind is, like, over the years, what have you come to know the Toro Y Moi fan base as? Because, you know, again, you cover so many different styles and sounds, and you were kind of mentioning earlier, like, yeah, I wanted to appeal to producers, but also music fans and other musicians too. And I imagine that as you continue doing what you do, like you're having new people stumble across your work as well, and being able to go back and, you know, really have like no knowledge of the whole chillwave era and everything like that. So, I mean, you know, as you've continued, like, you know, what is your understanding of how the Toro fan base has been changing or evolving? Like, you know, what kind of stuff do they share or feel in?
I think the coolest thing, or the biggest common factor that I've like noticed, is like a lot of my fans are creative, whether they're writers or scientists, grad students, whatever, like academic. I feel like people who make music, vlogs, who have that DIY ethos really do connect with Toro. I think they see themselves in the project, and truthfully, that's who I am too. Like I'm constantly, I don't know if I'm just like triggering my like imposter syndrome at times, but I do feel like I'm just like, I just want to try different stuff. I just want to try this medium, try this instrument. So like, it's, yeah, I don't know. I think that's who I've really like grown to like, just acknowledge. It's just like the creators and the creatives.
Mm-hmm. It's like aesthetically and musically, you're tinkering with each record, and you're kind of bringing that out in other people that have that same appeal in whatever they do.
Yeah, people who are down with experimenting.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Well, you know, again, Mahal is out now. Is there anything else outside of like tour dates and other stuff that you want to like, you know, make the audience more aware of, to kind of keep an eye out for?
Not at the moment. I mean, I love talking culture with you. I think you're a great conversationalist. I admire your taste. Yeah.
No,
yeah. I mean, so yeah,
hey, you came in here talking. You came in here talking up a storm as well. So you know, I appreciate you being open and just, you know, talking about everything.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, again, I thank you for your time, and enjoy what time you have left with the fam before you move on to your next performance.
Appreciate it. I'm just gonna finish this old issue of Guitar World. Pick up where I left off.
Is there an article in that's really like hitting right now? Renegades of Funk. Holy shit.
I'm about to learn these tabs real quick. So nice. Like, I gotta go. Or should I make it? This really is just like the sign of the times, right?
Oh wow, with arms wide open. That's a throwback.
We're talking about February 2001. So.
Right. Is what else? Is there any Puddle of Mud in there, or like some Creed? Sorry, some Nickelback, or
some Jet, some Billy Idol.
Okay.
Modern English. Mm-hmm. And then it goes back to Creed. But I think I'm gonna start off with a little bit of Creed.
Right, as you do.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what the second chorus.
Chat is Chat asked about POD. Yeah, maybe POD's in there. There's a little bit of. Everybody's very excited about the Creed.
Should I just give the internet like a tour of my childhood home? Like, look at this, like this art piece that my mom just has sitting here. It's just like I come home and there's this like art like this, you know, in my bedroom.
Okay.
We got some milk jug artwork.
Still life. Yeah.
I come here for the chugginess. You got to get the daily dose, the annual dose of chug.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you for coming through, and thank you for the miniature childhood bedroom tour. You call it the what?
You called it at the right time.
Yeah, no, exactly. I did really call it the right time. I didn't know that, you know, your PR didn't tell me like what a treat this was going to be in terms of like just it being such an intimate setting.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one.